Here's something many people don't realize. You don't need an Investec private bank account to save with Investec. Their personal cash investments are available from 100,000 Rand and designed for capital preservation. In markets like these, having a low-risk cash component alongside equities is simply sensible, particularly if you're over 55.
Markets are juggling geopolitics. Politics is wrestling with itself, and investors are quietly being told to lower their expectations. Good morning. This is BizNews Daybreak. I'm Asimenyite. Coming up, the latest from the Middle East as tensions continue to build, a look at whether South Africa's political system itself might need a rethink, concerns around security and governance, and finally, why the era of the star fund manager may be fading faster than many would like to admit. So plenty to get through. Let's start where markets are looking first. The situation in the Middle East remains fluid and increasingly complicated. Houthi militants are stepping up attacks. The United States is reportedly weighing potential ground operations in Iran, and at the same time, trying to manage a delicate web of energy diplomacy involving countries like Russia and Cuba. It's a reminder that geopolitics rarely moves in straight lines, and markets tend to feel that uncertainty before anyone else. Here's the latest.
The Trump administration is planning to allow a Russian oil tanker to dock in Cuba. We are told the shipment is expected to be permitted to arrive in the coming days. Here is President Trump speaking earlier to reporters aboard Air Force One.
Well, I would say, I told them, if a country wants to send some oil into Cuba right now, I have no problem with it.
Do you worry that that's
whether it's Russia or no?
Crude oil prices are rising. This is after Houthi militants in Yemen entered the war in the Middle East. The group fired missiles and drones earlier at Israel, and the Houthi said they would continue operations until the attacks on the Islamic Republic and its proxy militant groups cease. The Pentagon is reportedly preparing for weeks of ground operations inside Iran. The Washington Post reports any potential move would fall short of a full-scale invasion, and it could involve raids by special operations forces and conventional infantry troops. An additional 3,500 U.S. troops have already arrived in the Middle East, and that puts the total number of U.S. troops in the region at 50,000. Here is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett.
And I think they can do most, if not all of that, without ground forces. If they're talking about hard destruction of missile sites, of discovered nuclear sites, and their Navy. If, on the other hand, they want to conduct short-term operations to, say, go against their speedboats that have been so effective in the past, and we saw in Yemen with the sinking of the USS Cole by the speedboats, that may take troops on the ground for a short period of time. And, of course, the Kharg Island question begs the question if we're going to have to put ground troops there.
That is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett speaking earlier on Bloomberg this weekend. Now, on Sunday, the foreign ministers of Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia met in Islamabad to discuss proposals presented to Iran to end the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. We are told Saudi Arabia said any deal would have to include ironclad guarantees that Iran's production of ballistic missiles would be curbed and Iranian support of proxy groups such as Hezbollah would come to an end. Now, the foreign ministers are expected to meet again in Pakistan on Monday. Meantime, Iranian officials have already ruled out discussing Iran's missile program as a starting point to any ceasefire talks. Meantime, the International Atomic Energy Agency says a heavy water production plant in the Iranian city of Kondab sustained severe damage on March 27th, and it's no longer operational. Heavy water can allow nuclear reactors to operate and potentially produce plutonium for nuclear weapons without enriched uranium. Now, the Wall Street Journal reports the IAEA said the site did not contain any declared nuclear material, meaning there is no risk of radiation. In the States, Republican Representative Steve Scalise told ABC News the Trump administration has nearly eliminated the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran.
You're seeing him do it with the naval fleet, with their facilities that actually manufacture those missiles, those drones, and so many other things that he's decimating. But we're not there yet, but we're getting close.
That is Republican Representative Steve Scalise speaking to ABC News. Now, the attacks in the Middle East have extended into a fifth week. On Saturday, Iran struck 2 aluminum production sites in the UAE. The Middle East accounts for around 9% of global aluminum supply, and much of it is now blocked inside the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump is reportedly weighing a military operation to extract nearly 1,000 pounds of uranium from Iran. The Wall Street Journal reports the president remains open to the idea because it could help accomplish his goal of preventing Iran from ever making a nuclear weapon. And he's encouraging advisors to press Iran to agree to surrender the material as a condition for ending the war. Now, any move to seize the uranium by force would be complex and dangerous and could trigger retaliation from Iran and lengthen the war. This conflict has led to fears of lower economic growth and faster inflation or stagflation across the global economy. Here is Bloomberg oil strategist Julian Lee.
Almost all of these exports that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks are going south out of Yanbu. They're going towards Saudi Arabia's Asian markets. So they would be at risk if the Houthis do step up attacks on tankers.
Back home, there's a growing conversation about something more fundamental: how South Africa actually elects its leaders. Dr. Michael Louis argues that the current party-based system may be due for a rethink, suggesting a move toward direct accountability to voters. It's one of those ideas that sounds straightforward until you start asking what it would look like in practice. Here's his view.
We've got a system in our country where when you vote for a political party. That political party nominates a person on your behalf. You've got no say. So can you imagine these investors, these financiers, these financial advisors, you say to them, yes, 5 million rand, you're going to invest where you want to. You can't do that. You can't do that in a political system. We want a system where you can have a constituency, where you can have a person and a face, because political parties are always there to stay. I'm not against a political party. They're there forever. But what the political parties must be forced to do is to put a face to the constituency. Let me give you an example. Stellenbosch is a constituency. Can you just imagine if Thuli Madonsela has to stand in Stellenbosch as, let's say, as an independent? Firstly, all the other political parties that are going to participate will have to put a political candidate against Thuli to get creditworthiness. So they can't just put a flag, because with humble respect, a lot of political parties just put up a broomstick and their flag, and you vote for because you're voting for a political party and not a person. Power of your candidates for a political system must be in your hands and not in the hands of a political party. And that's what we are advocating to. And it's a fight for the soul of this nation. That's why I laugh when I hear, is Patrice Motsepe going to stand and become president of this nation? It doesn't even cross my mind. Why? Well, how does Michael Louis think? I want a system where the president is directly elected by the people. Why must I allow 400 people or 2,000 people in a room to go and look who's the president of our nation, or a parliamentary system where there's 400 people in parliament to vote our president? We, the people, must vote the president and our premiers. And not only that is, we must also go and we must get our power back to be able to recall them and to have a recall policy. So in the time that's left, I'm wanting to encourage you that this is a huge journey. Can you see that it's a lonely journey? Can you imagine not having individuals that are standing up, fighting for you day and night, that are in the trenches, reading every law, leaving every every commentary, so that we are ahead of the curve. Because even our legal advisors, and I really see Henny Barnard here from Starch Daily that really helped us so much in this, we have to even be ahead of the legal fraternity because it's too complicated. But we need you to understand the voice of the people and to fight for your power.
Staying with that theme of the state and its effectiveness, security analyst Willem Els has been looking at some of the country's vulnerabilities, from border control issues to weaknesses in intelligence coordination. His argument is that these gaps don't just exist on paper. They create real opportunities for organized crime and extremist networks to operate, which, when you put it like that, makes the issue feel a lot less abstract. Here's Willem Els.
What are the key weaknesses that are being exploited, Willem?
I think, with these terrorist networks, they really are opportunistic. They do their homework, and they will move in where these conditions are conducive for them to thrive, but also where the chances of being detected is minimized. So we see that what they look at your structural governance weaknesses within South Africa. In the first place, we mentioned your financial system vulnerabilities. We've got gaps still in our anti-money laundering and our terror funding controls. With the FATF, we updated our legislation, and there's some more money that has been allocated to the FIC, for instance, and so on. But we are not where we are supposed to be when it comes to those enforcement of these regulations. And secondly, I think what came out in the past 6 to 8 months, corruption that is endemic within your state facilities, and not only within your law enforcement, but beyond, but also up into a political sphere, that actually facilitates the groups to really thrive, because that facilitates not only for the terrorist groups, but also for your organized crime groups, weak enforcement that facilitate and create these opportunities for the networks to actually thrive. And then thirdly, something that is also mentioned a lot, and we say a lot about our porous borders, not only about the porous borders in terms of illegal immigrants coming in, but also the illicit goods and the money flows that is coming in and out. That is a big challenge. We have to look at your easy movement of people, goods, and your illicit finances that is coming from there. And then, very important, what we also mentioned quite a few times in the past, our intelligence fraternity is really in limbos. And, it's fragmented, and it is really not functioning the way it is supposed to function. And these people, they really thrive, and they exploit that in order to come up with their strategies.
Does South Africa's foreign policy play a role?
Yeah, I think our foreign policy, of course, it will play a role, because at the end of the day, it sends out a message. And Prof. Solomon actually suggests that your foreign policy can have an unintended consequences, even though it might not be intended by government and by the policy makers. It as it is at the moment, it opens the door. So we see that South Africa global political alignment and the diplomatic stances, it might send the wrong message to some of these groups, and also it increase the visibility of these groups on our horizon coming in here, and then also it creates perceptions of political sympathy and tolerance, prompting those groups to actually come to South Africa and to operate here.
And finally, to markets, and perhaps a slightly uncomfortable truth for active fund managers. Investment strategist Anthony Ginsberg says the era of the star stock picker is quietly being replaced by something far less glamorous, but often more effective. Over the past few decades, around $10 trillion has moved into index funds and ETFs, reflecting a shift toward lower costs and more consistent returns. In other words, boring might just be winning. Here's Ginsberg.
There's an investing revolution that we've all been living through. Some of us have been sleepwalking through it for the last 20 years. It's called the indexing revolution. There is literally $10 trillion that has left the active traditional fund management industry and has moved to index fund or ETF investing. Again, this is democratizing investing. If you want to buy into the US fantastic story that's going on, and we can talk about how the US is resilient. You don't have to go and find hotshot fund managers in America. 90% of American fund managers lose to the S&P 500 or even the Dow Jones. The same is true in Europe, man. And if you look at the South African fund managers, I mean, Si's a smart as hell chap, but he'll even admit to you, the vast majority of the SA fund managers, how are they going to now clop the S&P 500? There are a few smart guys out there. If you look in the 1980s, 1990s, insider trading wasn't very well regulated. I had friends on Wall Street that go to the 19th hole, the 18th hole in places like Scarsdale or Augusta, Georgia, if you could get in there. And there were lots of lekker secrets that were being passed on. It's now incredibly difficult. We have 10,000 stock analysts in the States. It's almost literally a needle in a haystack to find the one or two active fund managers on a 5-year basis that can outperform. So what are we trying to do? Find a few stars. The truth is most of those stars turn into comets, sadly. So I think my one takeaway, Alec, I've got 14 minutes here, is be poop scared of stars out there. There are many UK stars, you and I both know them. They've blown up in recent times. One or two have even been arrested. And the fancy names that get bandied about, like Peter Lynch, who I also grew up with from Fidelity, these guys made their geld in the good old days in the 70s and 80s. Peter made his money in buying up things called savings and loan banks. In those days, there weren't 10,000 analysts. So this investing revolution has been going on now for well over 30 years. You've probably heard of firms like Vanguard, but what you don't know is, and we've partnered with one of the biggest three for the last 25 years, it's called State Street. 3 of the 5 biggest investment firms on the globe, including BlackRock, who Alec knows well, are indexing firms. The state of the wakker skrik. You don't have to be a smarty pants and try and find hotshot fund managers and hedge fund managers necessarily in the States. Very few consistently outperform. If I literally showed you the numbers, he won't let me put up charts here, but basically 90% of US fund managers completely lose out to broad-based indexes. And the same is true actually in the UK and across Europe. So that revolution is partly because investing is a zero-sum game. What does zero-sum mean? For every winner, for every genius like Cy Jacobs, there are losers out there. And if you take costs into account, most active fund managers are quite expensive. It doesn't mean that they're domkopper, they're not. They've gone to Oxford and Harvard, etc. But they're running a 105-meter wedloop. My index funds and other guys like Vanguard, State Street, we're running basically just 100 meters with very cheap, low fees, low cost, 20, 30 basis points.
And that's BizNews Daybreak for this Monday. I'm Asimenita. Thanks for listening. And as always, we'll keep you posted as these stories develop. Thank you so much and enjoy your day.
When it comes to savings, we spend a lot of time discussing returns and interest rates, but not enough time asking why we're saving in the first place. That's the thinking behind Investec's #What'sYourWhy campaign that's been running. If your goal is stability or peace of mind, their personal cash investment is accessible from 100,000 Rand, and you don't need to bank with them. Whatever your reason for saving, Investec understands that.